The knock came at 3 in the morning. 3 soft taps that shouldn't have meant anything. But somehow Walter Green knew before he even opened his eyes, before his feet touched the cold floor, that his life was about to split in two. There'd be before the knock, and there'd be after. And a man 72 years old doesn't get many afters left. He'd been dreaming about Margaret again. Same dream he'd had every night for the 5 years since she died. Her at the kitchen sink, humming something he couldn't quite place. Sunlight catching the grey in her hair. Then he'd wake up, and the house would be empty, and the silence would have weight. The kind of weight that presses on your chest until breathing feels like work. The knock came again. Patient. Deliberate. Walter sat up, joints creaking like old hinges, and reached for his glasses on the nightstand. The bedside clock glowed red in the dark 3:14. Nobody came calling at 3:14 unless something was wrong, or dead, or both. He made his way down the hall of his cabin, one hand trailing the wall for balance, the other reaching for the Remington he kept by the door. Habit from 40 years of living alone in the Cascade foothills. Out here, 30 miles from the nearest town, you learn to answer the door prepared. Who's there? His voice came out rougher than he intended. 72 years of living will do that to your voice. Wear it down like river stone. Nothing. Then, clear as anything, right on the other side of the door. Help. Not help me, just help. One word, but it carried weight. Desperation has its own grammar. Walter unlocked the deadbolt with fingers that shook more than he liked to admit. Arthritis. The price you paid for a lifetime of carpentry. He opened the door 6 inches, gun raised, and whatever words he'd been about to say died in his throat. A boy stood on his porch, maybe 10, 11 years old. Skinny, all elbows and knees, wearing pajamas covered in mud. His feet were bare and bleeding. His face was the color of fresh snow, eyes too wide, breath coming in little gasps that steamed in the October cold. Behind him, filling the entire doorway, was something that shouldn't exist. 9 feet tall if it was an inch, covered in dark brown hair matted with leaves and blood. Shoulders broader than Walter's truck. Arms that hung past its knees, thick as telephone poles. And the face, Christ, the face. Not quite human, not quite ape. Something caught between, something evolution forgot, or abandoned or never meant to make in the first place. Its eyes met Walter's. Dark eyes, but not empty, not animal. There was something there, something that looked back at him and knew he was looking back. Intelligence, recognition, and underneath all that, pain. The creature had one massive hand resting on the boy's shoulder, gentle, protective. The other arm hung at its side, and Walter saw it then, the wound. A hole the size of a silver dollar in its chest, just below the collarbone. Blood, darker than any blood should be, ran down its torso in thick streams, pooling on Walter's porch, dripping through the boards. Jesus Christ, Walter whispered. The boy grabbed Walter's arm. His hand was so cold it burned. Please, he said. They shot him. The men with guns. He saved me, and they shot him. And he's dying, and I don't know what to do. And my mom doesn't believe me. And, slow down, son. Walter kept the gun pointed at the ground, but didn't lower it completely. 40 years in these woods had taught him plenty, but nothing had taught him this. Who shot who now? The creature made a sound, low and rumbling, like distant thunder. Its chest heaved with the effort of breathing. Blood bubbled at the wound with each exhale. Walter had seen enough hunting accidents to know that was a lung shot, maybe both lungs. Minutes, not hours, maybe less. The boy looked up at the creature, then back at Walter. His name is Uncle, he said, and damn if the kid's voice didn't crack saying it. He kept me safe for 3 days when I was lost. He brought me home. And these men, these hunters, they were tracking him, and they shot him, and I ran, and I didn't know where else to go, and I saw your light, and the creature swayed. One knee buckled. It caught itself on the doorframe, and the whole cabin shook. The wood splintered under its grip. Walter had maybe 5 seconds to make a decision that would define whatever time he had left on this earth. He could close the door, call the sheriff, let nature take its course. That's what a smart man would do. A sane man. But Walter Green had spent 5 years in a house full of ghosts. 5 years of waking up to dreams of a dead wife. 5 years of wondering what the hell the point was anymore. And something in those dark eyes, something in the way this impossible thing had its hand on that boy's shoulder, something in the wait of 3 in the morning, and the memory of Margaret at the sink humming something, made him step aside. Get him inside, Walter said. Now, look, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking this is where it goes sideways, where the old man gets himself killed, doing something stupid. And maybe you're right. But here's the thing about getting old, and I mean really old. The kind of old where you've buried everyone who mattered, and the calendar's just counting down to nothing. You start to care less about living, and more about whether you lived right. Walter had spent 5 years playing it safe, and it hadn't brought Margaret back, hadn't filled the silence, hadn't meant a damn thing. So yeah, he let a bleeding Bigfoot into his living room. And what happened next? Well, that's the story. But first, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. This channel's all about real stories that'll make you question everything you thought you knew. And trust me, after hearing how Walter Green spent one night trying to save something that shouldn't exist, you're gonna want to stick around for more. Now, back to that living room. The creature barely fit through the door. It had to duck, had to turn sideways, had to move with a delicate precision that seemed impossible for something that size. It left bloody handprints on the doorframe, on the walls, on everything it touched, to stay upright. The boy guided it like he'd done this before. One small hand on its massive forearm, murmuring words Walter couldn't quite hear. They made it to the center of the living room before the creature's legs gave out completely. It went down hard, shaking the whole cabin, sending Walter's photo of Margaret face down on the mantel. The creature ended up on its side, that enormous chest rising and falling in shallow gasps, blood spreading across Walter's hardwood floor in a pool that caught the lamplight and gleamed like oil. The boy dropped to his knees beside it. "Uncle," he said. "Uncle, please." The creature's hand found the boy's face. One finger, thick as a bratwurst, touched the kid's cheek with a gentleness that made Walter's throat tight. Then the hand fell away, too heavy to hold up anymore. "We need towels," Walter said. He was already moving toward the linen closet, his brain shifting into that mode it remembered from Vietnam, from the firefight outside Da Nang, where he'd held pressure on Tommy Kowalski's stomach wound for 40 minutes while they waited for the dust off. Not thinking, just doing. And water. And Christ, I don't know. What the hell do you do for something like this? You're going to help him? The boy's voice was small, hopeful. It cracked Walter's heart, clean in half. "I'm going to try, son. No promises." Walter grabbed every towel he owned, plus the old blankets from the hall closet. "What's your name, kid?" "Danny." "Danny Williams." "Okay, Danny Williams. I'm Walter, and I need you to stay calm and do exactly what I say, understand?" Danny nodded. His face was the color of spoiled milk, but his jaw was set. "Good kid, brave kid." Walter knelt beside the creature. Up close, it was even more impossible. The hair was coarse and thick, matted with mud and blood, and what looked like tree sap. The skin underneath, where Walter could see it, was dark gray, almost black. The wound in its chest was ragged, torn, probably from a rifle round that tumbled on impact. Blood pulsed with each heartbeat, weaker now, slower. "Uncle?" Danny whispered. "Can you hear me?" The creature's eyes opened, found Danny's face. Something passed between them, some communication Walter couldn't translate. Then those eyes found Walter. They looked at each other, man and myth, and Walter saw it all there. The pain, yes, but also the question. The same question Walter had asked God every night for 5 years. "Why am I still here? What's the point?" "You brought the boy home," Walter said quietly. He pressed a towel against the wound. The creature flinched, but didn't pull away. "You kept him safe. That counts for something." The creature made a sound, low and sad, like wind through empty rooms. Walter worked fast. He'd seen enough wounds to know this one was bad, but maybe not impossible. The bullet had gone through, which was good, no lead fragments to dig out. But it had punched through something important, probably nicked the lung, maybe hit a major vessel. Blood loss was the immediate problem. Then infection, then 1,000 other things he didn't have the knowledge or equipment to handle. But he tried anyway. He packed the wound front and back with towels, used his belt to strap them in place, talking the whole time to keep Danny calm and himself focused. "Pressure's what stops bleeding," he said. "You keep pressure on it until the body figures out how to clot. That's all we can do. Pressure and prayer, and I'm not sure which one works better." The creature's breathing slowed, steadied. Not better, but not worse. Holding. "Good," Walter said. "That's good. You stay with me now, here. You don't give up. Why? The question came from nowhere and everywhere. Why was he doing this? Why risk everything for something that, if the world knew, would have hunters and scientists and government agents crawling up his ass for whatever life he had left? Because Margaret used to say people are defined by what they do when nobody's watching. And because that boy's face was the first face in 5 years that had needed him for something that mattered. And because that creature had kept a child safe, had walked him home, had done what Walter should have done for his own daughter before the cancer took her. Because it was 3 in the morning and the ghosts were quiet for the first time in years. Danny sat cross-legged on the floor, one small hand resting on the creature's arm. He's not going to die, right? Walter looked at the wound, at the blood still seeping through the towels, at the way the creature's chest barely rose and fell. He looked at Danny's face, at that raw hope that only children can carry. Not if I can help it, Walter said. That was the truth, anyway. Whether it was enough truth that remained to be seen. The creature's breathing changed around 4:30. Got rougher, wet-sounding. Walter had heard that sound before, in the jungle, in men with sucking chest wounds who didn't make it to the hospital. Fluid in the lungs, drowning from the inside. Danny, I need you to do something for me. Walter kept his voice steady, calm, even though his heart was hammering. In the kitchen, under the sink, there's a first aid kit. Big white box. Bring it here. Danny ran. The creature's eyes tracked the boy's movement, then found Walter again. I know, Walter said quietly. You're scared for him. Me too. The creature made a sound, not quite a word, but close. Something with syllables, with intention. Walter had spent 40 years in these woods and had never heard anything make a sound like that. It wasn't animal. It wasn't human. It was something else, something between, and it was trying to tell him something. Easy, Walter said. Save your strength. But the creature kept trying, kept pushing out sounds that caught in its throat and bubbled in its chest. Finally, Walter understood not the words, but the meaning underneath. It was saying goodbye. No, Walter said firmly. No, we're not doing that. You stay right here. The creature's hand moved, slow and shaking, until it found Walter's wrist. The grip was weak, nothing like what it must have been. One finger tapped Walter's arm, 3 times. Soft, deliberate. Then it pointed at Danny, who was running back with the first aid kit. He'll be okay, Walter said. I'll make sure of it, but you gotta meet me halfway here. You gotta fight. The creature's eyes held his, and Walter saw it then, not giving up, but letting go. The difference between quitting and accepting. It knew it was dying, had probably known from the moment the bullet hit. But it had walked miles anyway, with a child it needed to get home, with a wound that would have dropped a bear in minutes. Some things you do because you have to. Some things you do because not doing them would mean you're already dead in the ways that matter. Danny skidded to his knees beside them, first aid kit clattering. Is he okay? What's wrong? He's tired, Walter said. But we're not done yet. Walter tore into the kit like he was 22 again, like he was back in that clearing with Tommy bleeding out, and the sound of rotors finally cutting through the gunfire. Gauze, tape, antibiotic ointment, that probably wouldn't do shit but made him feel like he was doing something. He changed the towels, repacked the wound, tried to make the bleeding stop through sheer force of will. The creature watched him work, never looked away. And in those dark eyes, Walter saw something he recognized, gratitude mixed with resignation. The look of someone who knows they're dying, but is grateful they're not dying alone. Talk to him, Walter told Danny. Let him hear your voice. Danny leaned close, one hand on the creature's chest, right over its heart. Remember when you found me, he said. I was so scared. And you took my hand, and you didn't have to do that. You could have just left me. But you didn't. The creature's breathing hitched. One massive hand found Danny's small one. And you showed me the cave, and Auntie was there, and she gave me berries, and you kept me warm, and Danny's voice cracked. And when those men came, you hid me. You put yourself between me and the guns. You saved my life. Walter's hands stilled. Men with guns? Danny nodded, not looking away from the creature. They were tracking him. I heard them talking. They said they'd been hunting for years. Said they were going to prove it exists. Uncle heard them coming and he ran, but I couldn't keep up, and they got close and he stopped, swallowed. He roared, really loud, made them think he was farther away than he was. And when they chased the sound, he grabbed me and we ran a different way. But one of them, One of them must have been behind us, because I heard the shot, and Uncle fell, and I thought, you thought he was dead, Walter finished. But he got back up, and he walked. For hours, with the hole in his chest, just to get me home, just to make sure I was safe. Walter looked at the creature at Uncle, and saw something he'd spent 50 years trying to understand. What it means to be human. Or more than human. Or something that transcends the stupid categories people use to divide the world into us and them. You don't measure a soul by how it looks. You measure it by what it does, when the world's on fire and nobody's keeping score. Walter? Danny's voice was small. Is he going to make it? Walter looked at the wound, at the shallow breathing, at the blood that kept coming no matter what he did. He looked at Danny's face, at that desperate hope. He thought about Margaret, about the lies they tell in hospitals when someone's dying but the family isn't ready. Comfortable lies, kind lies. But Walter Green was 72 years old and too tired for lies. I don't know, son, he said. I really don't know. The sun came up around 6. Grey light filtered through the windows, turning everything pale and washed out. The creature's breathing had steadied some, but it hadn't improved. Still shallow, still wet. Walter had gone through every towel in the house. The floor was a mess of blood and mud and things he'd never get clean. Danny had fallen asleep curled against the creature's side, one hand still holding onto a finger the size of a broom handle. The kid was exhausted, past exhausted, running on fumes and terror. Walter sat in his armchair, bones aching, watching them both, man and myth and boy. The strangest pieta anyone ever saw. His coffee had gone cold an hour ago, but he kept drinking it anyway. Waste not, want not his mother's voice, still sharp in his head 60 years after she died. Some things stick. Some things become the bones you build yourself around. The creature's eyes opened, found Walter. They looked at each other in the grey morning light, and Walter saw the question there. Why? Because someone should, Walter said quietly. And I guess today that someone's me. The creature made a sound. Soft, almost like a sigh. Besides, Walter said, I've spent 5 years in this house, doing nothing that matters. Figured it was time to change that. The truth was harder. The truth was that he'd been dying slow for half a decade. Dying the way old men die when they've lost everyone who gave their life shape. Not physically dying, that would have been easier, but dying in all the ways that count. Purpose, connection. The feeling that you're part of something bigger than the empty rooms, and the silence and the calendar pages falling away. This creature, this impossible thing bleeding out on his floor, it had given him something. A reason to get up, a reason to try. And maybe that was selfish. Maybe he was helping because it made him feel useful again. But hell, he'd take it. Motive didn't change outcome. Danny stirred, rubbed his eyes, looked at Uncle. He's still breathing, he said, and the relief in his voice was so naked it hurt. Yeah, Walter said, still breathing. What do we do now? That was the question, wasn't it? The rational move was to call someone, sheriff, maybe, or a veterinarian, or Christ. He didn't even know who you called for this. But calling meant questions. Questions meant people coming to his cabin, seeing what he had here, taking it away, studying it, caging it. Or worse, Walter had seen what people did to things they didn't understand, had seen it in the jungle, in villages where soldiers needed an enemy and didn't care much about details, had seen it in the way folks in town looked at him after Margaret died, like grief was contagious, like sadness was something you could catch if you got too close. The creature had saved Danny, had kept him safe, had walked home bleeding just to deliver a child it had no reason to care about. And the world would repay that by turning it into a specimen, by making it famous and dead. We keep him hidden, Walter said, and we hope he heals. What if he doesn't? Walter didn't have an answer for that. So he just looked at the boy, at the fear and the hope fighting for space on his face, and said the only thing worth saying. Then we gave him a place to die that wasn't alone in the woods. That seemed to satisfy Danny. Or maybe the kid was just too tired to argue. He went to the bathroom, then to the kitchen, made himself a bowl of cereal from the box Walter kept for the grandkids who never visited. Normal kid things in a situation that was anything but normal. Walter changed the bandages again. The bleeding had slowed some. Not stopped, but slowed. The creature's pulse, when he pressed his fingers against the thick vein in its neck, was weak, but steady. 120 beats per minute. Maybe. fast, but not racing. The skin around the wound felt hot. Fever setting in, probably. Infection. He had antibiotics in the medicine cabinet, amoxicillin left over from a tooth infection last year, but he had no idea if they'd work on whatever this thing's biology was. No idea about dosage. No idea about anything. But he gave it one anyway. Crushed up 3 pills, mixed them with water, spooned the mixture into the creature's mouth, while Danny held its head steady. It swallowed, barely, throat working in slow convulsions. "That's good," Walter said. "That's real good." He had no idea if it was good. But hope's a hell of a drug, and sometimes you need to dose yourself just to get through. The morning crawled by in a strange, suspended time. Danny sat with the creature, talking to it in low tones, telling it stories about school and his mom and a dog he wanted but couldn't have because their landlord didn't allow pets. Kid stuff. Important stuff. Walter made more coffee, did the dishes, tried to think about what came next. The wound would need cleaning again in a few hours. The fever would likely get worse before it got better. And then there was the problem of food, of water, of what the hell this thing ate when it wasn't dying in a stranger's living room. But that was future Walter's problem. Present Walter just needed to keep it alive for the next hour, then the hour after that, and so on. Same way he'd gotten through the first year after Margaret. 1 hour, 1 day, 1 breath at a time, until suddenly you've survived longer than you thought possible. Around 10, the creature opened its eyes again. They were clearer this time, more focused. It looked at Walter, then at Danny, then down at itself. At the bandages and the blood and the situation it had somehow survived to see. It made a sound, 3 syllables, low and rumbling, the same ones it had tried to make earlier, but stronger now, more deliberate. "What's he saying?" Danny asked. Walter had no idea. But the tone was clear enough. Gratitude. Or maybe apology. Or maybe just acknowledgement. "We're here, you and me, in this impossible moment, and isn't that something?" "He's saying thank you," Walter said, because that's what it sounded like in the language, underneath language. "And you're welcome." The creature's hand moved, slow and shaking, until it found Walter's wrist again. The grip was still weak, but firmer than before. It squeezed once, gentle, then let go. Walter's throat went tight. He was 72 years old, had buried a wife and a daughter, had seen friends die in rice paddies half a world away, and somehow this moment, this connection with something that shouldn't exist, this was the thing that broke him. He felt tears he hadn't cried in 5 years, burn behind his eyes, felt his chest hitch with something too big to name. "You're going to make it," he said, and his voice cracked, saying it. "You hear me? You're going to make it because I didn't spend the whole damn night keeping you alive, just to watch you die now." The creature's eyes held his, and Walter saw it again, that intelligence, that presence, something looking back at him that understood, that knew. Danny leaned close. "He knows," he said softly. "He knows you're trying." "Trying's all I got," Walter said. "It's enough," Danny said. "It has to be enough." And maybe it was, because when Walter checked the wound an hour later, the bleeding had stopped completely. The bandages were still soaked, but no fresh blood. The creature's breathing was still rough, still labored, but not worse. Holding, surviving, small victories. But Walter had learned a long time ago that small victories were the only kind that mattered. The big ones, the dramatic ones, those were for movies. Real life was measured in hours survived, in wounds that stopped bleeding, in breaths taken when taking them should have been impossible. They could do this. Maybe. Probably not. But maybe. And maybe was more than Walter had felt in 5 years. By afternoon, Walter knew they had a problem. Not the creature dying that was still possible, still likely, but at least it was stable for now. No, the problem was practical, basic, the kind that should have occurred to him at 3 in the morning but hadn't, because his brain was too busy processing the impossible. Danny's mother was going to notice her son was gone. "What time did you leave?" Walter asked, watching the boy spoon more water into Uncle's mouth. "I don't know. Late. After the thing at the creek." "What thing at the creek?" Danny's face went still. Then, quiet. "Uncle saved my mom from the mountain lions." "Mountain lions," Walter said it flat. Not a question. 2 of them. Mom went to get water, and they had her cornered, and Uncle came out of nowhere and roared and scared them off. Danny looked at the creature, at the rise and fall of its chest. That's when the hunters shot him. He was still close because he was protecting her, and they shot him. Walter sat back in his chair. The picture came together in his head, sharp and ugly. Woman goes to creek. Lions move in. Creature saves her. Hunters tracking the creature, see their chance, and take the shot. Creature runs, bleeding, finds the boy because the boy had been with it before Danny had said something about 3 days, about a cave, about being kept safe. Your mom saw him, Walter said. Danny nodded. She freaked out. Shot at him, missed, but it scared him, and he ran, and I ran after him because he was hurt, and I was scared, and he stopped, swallowed. She's probably looking for me. Yeah, Walter said. She probably is, which meant decisions had to be made. Walter could call the sheriff, tell them where Danny was, make up some story about finding the kid on his property. That was the safe play, the normal play. But it also meant questions, meant police cars in his driveway, meant people coming around, asking what the hell a 72-year-old hermit was doing with a missing child, or he could do nothing. Wait for Danny's mom to show up on her own. She'd come looking eventually. Woman loses her kid, she doesn't stop looking. But that might take days, and in the meantime, the hunters who shot Uncle might still be out there, following blood trails, looking to finish what they started. The third option was the crazy one. But then again, everything about the last 12 hours was crazy. What was one more bit of crazy on top? Can you find your way home from here? Walter asked. Danny nodded. I think so. Maybe. Then we take him back. Walter looked at the creature, at the impossible size of it, at the fact that moving it would probably tear the wound open again. We load him in my truck. We drive you home. We let your mom know you're safe. And we hope to hell she's as good a person as her kid. What if she calls the sheriff? Then we deal with it. Walter stood, joints popping, back aching. But the way I figure it, she saw him save her life. Might be she's got questions. Might be she's got enough sense to keep her mouth shut about the thing that kept her from being lion food. Danny looked at Uncle, then at Walter. You'd do that? Risk it? Walter thought about that. About risk. About the calculation he'd been doing for 5 years. Play it safe. Don't make waves. Just wait quietly for the end. And about what that had gotten him. An empty house. A life measured in what he'd avoided instead of what he'd done. Kid, he said. At my age, risk is relative. Worst case, I spend my last few years in jail for harboring a cryptid or some such nonsense. Best case, we save his life, and nobody has to know about it. Either way, it's more interesting than sitting in this house, waiting to die. That got a smile out of Danny. Small, but there. Okay, the boy said. Let's do it. Getting a 9-foot-tall, bleeding Bigfoot into the bed of a pickup truck turned out to be exactly as difficult as it sounded. First, Walter had to back the truck up to the porch. Not easy when your driveway was gravel and your knees barely worked. Then they had to maneuver Uncle through the door without tearing the wound open, without knocking him unconscious on the doorframe, without Walter's back giving out completely. The creature helped as much as it could, pushed with its legs, pulled with its arms, made low grunting sounds that might have been pain or effort or encouragement. Hard to say. Danny walked backward in front of it, hands on its shoulders, saying things like, almost there, and you're doing great in that bright false voice people use when they're terrified. Walter pushed from behind, hands under the creature's armpits, feeling muscle and bone under all that hair, feeling the heat of fever radiating through. The thing was burning up. 103, 104, maybe higher. They needed to move fast. They got it to the truck. Then came the hard part. On 3, Walter said. We push, you pull, and we pray it works. It didn't work on 3. Or on 4. On 5, Walter felt something in his back pop and saw stars for a second. On 6, Uncle made a sound like nothing Walter had ever heard. Agony and determination mixed and hauled itself up using the truck bed rail. It collapsed face down in the truck bed, chest heaving, fresh blood soaking through the bandages. But it was in. That was something. Walter stood there breathing hard, one hand on the truck, the other on his lower back. 72 years old and hoisting cryptids. This wasn't how he'd pictured his retirement. Then again, he hadn't pictured much of anything. That was the problem. You okay? Danny asked. I'll live. Walter grabbed blankets from the cabin, threw them over Uncle. Probably. Maybe. We'll see. The drive was slow. Walter took the logging roads, the ones nobody used anymore since the timber company pulled out. 10 miles of gravel and potholes and washouts, but at least there was no chance of running into other vehicles. No chance of having to explain why his truck bed was full of cryptozoological evidence. Danny sat in the cab giving directions. Turn here. No, the other way. Past that big tree. Yeah, that one. Uncle stayed still in the back, covered in blankets, occasionally making sounds that might have been pain or might have been the truck bouncing over rocks. Walter checked the rear view every 30 seconds, watching for movement, for signs of things getting worse. The forest rolled past outside the windows. Douglas fir and western hemlock, salal and sword ferns. All of it draped in that particular green that comes from too much rain and not enough Sunday. Walter had lived here 40 years and never stopped finding it beautiful. The way the light filtered through the canopy, the smell of wet earth and decomposing needles, the sense that you were a guest in something older and wilder than you'd ever be. People talked about civilization like it was the important thing, like the real world was cities and roads and the internet. But Walter knew better. The real world was this. Trees that were here before there were roads to cut through them. Creatures that existed whether people believed in them or not. The truth underneath the stories people told themselves to feel safe. That's it, Danny said, pointing. That's our place. The cabin was smaller than Walter's, older. The roof sagged in the middle, and one of the porch posts leaned at an angle that suggested it had given up on being vertical a long time ago. A woman stood in the yard, pacing, phone pressed to her ear. When she saw the truck, she froze. Then she ran. Walter had just enough time to think, this is either going to work or it's going to get me shot, before she yanked the passenger door open and pulled Danny out in a hug, so fierce the boy actually squeaked. Where the hell I've been calling, do you have any idea? She stopped, pulled back, looked at her son's face. Are you okay? Did someone hurt you? I'm fine, Mom. I'm fine. Danny glanced at Walter, then at the truck bed. But we need your help. Who is this? She looked at Walter like he was something that crawled out from under a rock. Who the hell are you and why do you have my son? Name's Walter Green, live about 10 miles east, and your son showed up at my door at 3 this morning asking for help. Walter nodded at the truck bed. Help for that. She looked, froze, went pale. Jesus Christ, she whispered. That's what I said, Walter agreed. She walked to the truck bed slow, like she was approaching something that might spook. Walter couldn't blame her. He pulled back the blankets just enough for her to see the wound, the bandages, the blood. I shot at him, she said. Her voice was barely there. Last night, at the creek. He saved me from the mountain lions, and I shot at him. You missed, Walter said. These aren't your bullets. These are from the men Danny says were hunting him. She looked at her son. You went after him. After I told you to stay inside, you went after him. He was bleeding, Mom. I couldn't just. Danny's voice cracked. He saved me when I was lost. Remember? 3 days in the woods and everyone thought I was dead and he kept me safe. He and Auntie. They fed me and kept me warm, and when the hunters came close, he hid me. And then he brought me home and you shot at him and the hunters shot him for real and he kept going anyway because he needed to make sure I was okay and... Okay, she held up a hand. Okay, I'm processing. Give me a second. Walter gave her 30. Watched her face cycle through denial, acceptance, fear, something that might have been guilt. Finally, she looked at him. What do you need? She asked. Place to put him, somewhere warm and out of sight. Your cabin's closer than mine, and moving him again. Walter shook his head. Might kill him. She looked at the cabin, at the creature, at her son. Then, back bedroom, we can clear it out. Getting Uncle inside took all 3 of them, plus physics that shouldn't have worked, but they managed it. Barely. By the time they had him on the floor of the back bedroom, Walter's back was screaming, and his heart was doing things hearts shouldn't do at 72. The woman she'd said her name was Sarah. Sarah Williams brought pillows and blankets, made a kind of nest. Danny got water, brought it in a mixing bowl because nothing else was big enough. Walter changed the bandages again, checked vitals, tried to remember everything he'd learned in Vietnam about keeping people alive when the odds said they shouldn't be. He's stable, Walter said finally. Fever's bad, but it's not critical yet. Wound's ugly, but it's not bleeding. Infection's the main worry now. What do we do about that? Sarah asked. Hope, pray. And if you've got any antibiotics, we give him those. Walter straightened up, wincing. Beyond that, it's wait and see. They stood there, the three of them, looking at the impossible thing on the floor. The thing that breathed, that bled, that had saved a child and a woman who didn't believe in him until he did. The thing that shouldn't exist but did anyway. Why? Sarah asked quietly. Why would you do this? Help him? Walter thought about that. About Margaret. About the empty house. About 5 years of nothing mattering. About waking up this morning to a knock at the door and a choice that should have been simple but wasn't. Because someone had to, he said. And it might as well be me. That was part of it. The other part, the truer part, he kept to himself. That he'd been dying slow for 5 years. That this moment, this choice, this creature, it was the first thing in half a decade that made him feel alive. Not comfortable, not safe. Alive. And at 72, you take your alive moments where you find them. The first 2 days were the worst. Uncle's fever spiked to dangerous levels. Walter couldn't get an accurate reading with a thermometer made for humans, but the skin was hot enough to hurt when you touched it for more than a few seconds. The wound wept, fluid that smelled wrong, infected. The kind of smell that meant tissue dying. Walter cleaned it 3 times a day, packed it with fresh bandages, dosed the creature with enough antibiotics to knock out a horse. Danny stayed with him almost constantly, talked to him, read to him from books Walter didn't know. Kids still read Jack London, Where the Red Fern Grows. Things about survival and loyalty and animals that understood. Sometimes, Uncle's eyes would open and track the sound of Danny's voice. Sometimes he'd make those low rumbling sounds. Mostly he just lay there, chest rising and falling, fighting whatever war was happening inside him. Sarah brought food, helped with the bandage changes, didn't ask questions she probably should have asked. Like what were they going to do long term? Or what happened if he died? Or what would they tell people if this all came out? Instead, she just helped. Made soup that Uncle couldn't eat but Danny could. Brought more blankets when the fever made him shake. Sat with Walter in the small hours when the night felt too big and the task felt impossible. I didn't believe Danny, she said one of those nights. 2 in the morning, both of them exhausted, watching Uncle's chest struggle. When he told me what happened in the woods, I thought it was trauma, or imagination, or I don't know. Kid stuff. Most people wouldn't believe it, Walter said. You did. I saw him. You could have turned us away. Walter was quiet for a moment. Outside, an owl called. The sound echoed through the trees, lonely and ancient. I spent 5 years in a house, by myself waiting to die, he said finally. Not physically dying. The other kind. The kind where you're still walking around, but nothing matters anymore. Your boy gave me something to matter about. Figured that was worth returning. Sarah looked at him. Really looked. You lost someone, wife. 5 years ago, cancer. The word still tasted like ash. After that, just stopped seeing the point. Kids? Daughter. She died before Margaret. Same thing. Different cancer. Walter's hands tightened on the armrest. Sometimes, I think that's what really killed my wife. Not the tumors. Just the weight of losing a child. Body gave up because the heart did first. They sat with that for a while. The quiet between people who've both learned that life takes things whether you're ready or not. I'm sorry, Sarah said finally. Yeah, me too. Uncle made a sound, low and pained. Walter moved to check the wound, but Sarah got there first. She'd learned the routine. Peel back the bandages, check for fresh bleeding, clean with antiseptic, repack, wrap. Her hands were steadier than his, younger, less arthritis. He's going to make it, she said, like saying it would make it true. Maybe, Walter said. No, he is. She looked at the creature, at the way his massive chest rose and fell. He saved my son. He saved me. That has to count for something. Walter thought about that, about cosmic justice and earned outcomes and all the ways the world was supposed to work if there was any fairness at all. But he'd buried a daughter and a wife and spent a year in Vietnam, watching good men die for nothing. He knew better than to trust in fairness. It counts, he said, just not always enough. But he hoped. Despite everything, despite the odds, despite 7 decades of learning, not to get his hopes up, he hoped. On the 3rd day, the fever broke. Walter was dozing in the chair. Sarah was making coffee. Danny was at school, because at some point life had to pretend to be normal. Uncle's breathing changed, got deeper, slower. Walter's eyes snapped open. The creature was looking at him, not the glassy, half-aware look of the last few days. Looking, present, conscious. Those dark eyes tracked Walter's movement as he stood, as he walked over, as he knelt down beside him. "Hey," Walter said. "Welcome back." Uncle made a sound, 3 syllables again, the same ones from before. Walter still didn't know what they meant, but they sounded less urgent now, less desperate. "Waniku Raha," the creature said, clear as anything. "Waniku Raha." "I don't understand," Walter said. The creature's hand moved, found Walter's wrist, squeezed. Then it touched its own chest, right over the heart, and then reached out and touched Walter's. "I'm here. Don't be afraid." Walter said it without thinking, just translating the gesture into words. "That's what you're saying, isn't it? I'm here. Don't be afraid." Uncle's eyes held his. Something passed between them, some understanding that went beyond language. Then the creature's hand fell away, too heavy to hold up anymore. But he was alive, awake, present. Sarah came in with coffee, stopped, stared. "Is he awake?" Walter said. "And I think he's going to make it." They did make it. Not fast, not easy, but over the next week, Uncle got stronger. Started eating berries, roots, some kind of plant Sarah found in the woods that Danny recognized from the cave. Started moving, sitting up, eventually standing with help. The wound closed slow, leaving a scar that puckered the skin underneath the hair. Walter was there most days, checking the wound, changing bandages, teaching Sarah and Danny what to watch for, but also just sitting, talking, telling Uncle about Margaret, about his daughter, about the life he'd lived before it hollowed out. The creature would listen, those dark eyes, never leaving Walter's face, making sounds that might have been language, or might have been just companionship. Danny told Walter one evening that Uncle understood more than people thought. "He knows what you're saying. Maybe not every word, but the important stuff, the feeling stuff." Walter believed him, because sitting there with this impossible creature, feeling less alone than he had in 5 years, there was communication happening, just not with words. But it couldn't last forever. They all knew that. On the 10th day, Walter came by to find Danny in tears and Sarah looking grim. Uncle was standing, actually standing on his own, looking out the window toward the tree line. "He's leaving," Danny said. "Isn't he?" Uncle turned, looked at the boy, made a sound so sad and gentle it broke Walter's heart. "He has to," Sarah said quietly. "The hunters might come back. Someone might have heard about the missing boy and the sightings. The longer he stays, the more dangerous it gets." She was right. Walter knew she was right, but that didn't make it easier. They walked Uncle to the edge of the woods that evening, all 3 of them, slow, because he still favored the wounded side, but walking, living. The sun was setting through the trees, turning everything gold and green and impossible. At the tree line, Uncle stopped, turned. He looked at each of them, in turn Danny first, then Sarah, then Walter. His hand found Danny's head, rested there, gentle, fingers ruffling the boy's hair. Then he touched Sarah's shoulder, a kind of blessing, or maybe just goodbye. Finally, he looked at Walter. Old man and ancient creature, 2 things that shouldn't be, but were anyway. Uncle's hand found Walter's chest again, right over the heart, pressed there. Then he made those sounds again. "Vanituraha," Uncle said. "I'm here," Walter said back. "I'm here, and I'm not afraid anymore." Uncle's hand fell away. He turned and walked into the trees. 3 steps, and the forest swallowed him like he'd never been. Like he was just a story, just a myth, just something people told themselves to explain the sounds in the dark. But Walter's chest still felt warm where the creature had touched it. Still felt the weight of that massive hand, the gentleness of it, the way it had pressed right over his heart like it was checking to make sure the thing was still beating. Danny was crying openly. Sarah had her arm around him. Walter just stood there, watching the trees, feeling something he hadn't felt in 5 years. Purpose. Connection. The sense that he'd done something that mattered. 3 weeks later, Walter was back in his own cabin. The blood was finally cleaned from the floor, the towels were thrown away, and the house was quiet again. But a different kind of quiet. Not empty, just waiting. He found himself standing in the kitchen sometimes, looking out at the tree line, listening. Once in a while, late at night, he'd hear it. 3 knocks. soft, deliberate. He'd go to the window and see nothing, but he'd feel it. The presence, the knowing that he wasn't alone out here. Sarah called him once a week, checking in, she said, but Walter knew it was more than that. They were bonded now, the three of them, by something nobody else would ever understand. They had proof of the impossible and chose to keep it quiet. That meant something. Danny came by sometimes on weekends, helped Walter with projects around the cabin, told him stories about school, about his life. One afternoon, sitting on the porch, the boy asked the question Walter had been waiting for. Do you think he's okay out there? Walter thought about that, about the creature, walking away into the trees, still healing, still carrying a bullet scar from men who wanted to prove he existed, about the dangers that must be in these woods for something that size, that rare, about survival when the world wants you extinct. I think he survived a long time without us, Walter said finally. And now he knows there are people who'll help instead of hunt. That's something. Danny nodded, satisfied. Then, Walter, thanks for helping him. Thanks for not calling the cops or doing what normal people would have done. Normal's overrated, Walter said. That night, Walter sat in his chair with cold coffee and looked at Margaret's picture on the mantel. Her smile, her eyes, the way she'd looked at him like he was worth looking at. I did something, he told her, told the picture, told the ghost, told the memory. Something that mattered. First time in 5 years I felt like I was alive, instead of just waiting. The house was quiet, but not empty, not anymore. Outside, somewhere in the trees, something moved. Walter heard it, the crack of a branch, the whisper of something big passing through. He went to the window and looked out into the dark. 3 knocks, soft against the side of the cabin. Walter smiled. I know, he said to the darkness. I'm here too. The darkness didn't answer, but it didn't have to. Some things you know without words. Some connections transcend the stupid limits of language. Some gratitude is measured in the sound of knocks in the night, and the feeling that someone's watching over you when you thought you were alone. Walter went to bed that night and dreamed of Margaret again. But this time she wasn't alone at the sink. This time there were others there, his daughter, friends he'd lost in the war, people who'd mattered. They were all there together, and Margaret turned and smiled at him and said without words, You did good. You lived right. That counts for something. He woke up at 3 in the morning. The house was quiet, but out in the trees, if you listened close, you could hear it. The low whoop of something ancient calling to something else, ancient, answering back, a conversation in the language underneath language. Walter lay there in the dark, listening, feeling more peace than he had in years. At 72, he'd finally learned what Margaret always knew, that you measure a life not by how long it lasts, but by what you do with the time you're given, by who you help when nobody's watching, by the choices you make when the world says to choose different. He'd chosen right. Finally, after 5 years of choosing nothing, of letting life happen instead of living it, he'd chosen right. 3 more years, the doctor would tell him later. Maybe 4 if you're lucky. The heart's worn out. Mr. Green, it's had a good run. 3 years turned out to be exactly right. Long enough to see Danny graduate middle school. Long enough to watch Sarah start dating again, someone from town who treated her right. Long enough to write everything down in a journal he gave to Danny, with instructions not to open until he was gone. Long enough for 3 more winters, 3 more springs, 3 more rounds of knocks in the night that let him know he wasn't forgotten. Walter died in his sleep on a Tuesday in October. Peaceful, no pain, the way everyone hopes to go, but few people actually do. They found him in his chair, coffee mug still in his hand, looking out the window at the tree line. Danny and Sarah came to the funeral. Small thing, not many people left who remembered him. They buried him next to Margaret, under Douglas firs that had been seedlings when he was born. After the service, after everyone left, Danny walked to the edge of the cemetery where the forest began. He stood there for a long time, looking into the trees. Then he heard it, 3 knocks, soft against a tree trunk. I know, Danny said to the forest. He told me, about you, about what you did for each other. The forest was quiet, then movement. Just for a second, a shape, impossible and huge, stepping into a patch of sunlight. Looking at him, those dark eyes that had watched over him when he was lost, that had looked at Walter with understanding when words failed. Uncle raised one massive hand, pressed it over his heart, then pointed at the grave, then back to his heart. I know, Danny said again, and his voice cracked. He's here too, always. The creature watched him a moment longer, then turned and walked back into the trees, back into the myth, back into the impossible truth that some things exist, whether people believe in them or not. Danny stood there until the sun began to set. Then he walked back to his truck, got in, and drove home. In the rearview mirror, the cemetery disappeared behind the trees, but he knew Walter wasn't there. Not really. Walter was wherever the 3 a.m. knocks came from, wherever impossible things go when they need to rest. The journal sat on Danny's passenger seat. He'd read it that night, every word Walter had written about those 10 days, about the choice he'd made, about finding purpose when he thought there was nothing left to find. The last page just said, "Tell the story or don't tell it, but remember what it meant. Remember that being human isn't about what you look like or where you come from. It's about what you do when someone needs help, and helping them might cost you everything." That's what I learned. That's what he taught me. And that's worth more than all the empty years I spent forgetting. Danny didn't tell the story. Not for 20 years. Not until both his mother and Walter were gone, until the hunters who'd shot Uncle were old or dead themselves, until enough time had passed that the truth could live without putting anyone at risk. But he remembered. Every 3 a.m, every time he heard something in the trees, every time he had to choose between the easy thing and the right thing, he remembered an old man who chose right when it mattered. He remembered a creature that shouldn't exist, but did anyway. And he remembered the truth that connected them both. We're here. Don't be afraid. Sometimes that's all you need to say, to save a life or a soul. The forest keeps its secrets, always has. But sometimes, if you listen close on those October nights, when the air's cold and the stars are bright and the world feels bigger than your problems, you can hear it. 3 knocks, soft, deliberate, someone saying, "I remember, I'm here. Don't be afraid." And if you're lucky, if you've lived right and chosen well and helped when helping was hard, you might hear 3 knocks back, echo across time and memory and all the impossible distances between what should be and what is. Wanikuraha, I'm here. Don't be afraid. That's what it means. That's what it always meant. And that's what matters when everything else falls away. The rest is just details. The story Danny finally told, 20 years later, started with a video. He was 41 by then, married, 2 kids of his own, working as a park ranger in the Cascades, which felt like both irony and destiny wrapped together. His oldest daughter, Emma, was 12, same age he'd been when Uncle brought him home that first time. The video surfaced on a cryptozoology forum. Grainy footage, 10 seconds long, supposedly taken by a hiker near Mount Hood. It showed something large moving through the trees, then turning toward the camera, just for a second, just long enough to see the face. Danny watched it 3 times before his hands started shaking. It wasn't Uncle, too young, too small, but it was one of them, had to be. Same build, same movement, that particular way they held themselves that was neither ape nor human, but something else entirely. The comment section was exactly what he expected. Half the people calling it fake, CGI, a guy in a suit, the other half getting worked up, talking about expeditions, about finally proving it, about what this could mean for science. One comment made him stop scrolling. Anyone know the exact location? Got my hunting license ready. This'll be the trophy of a lifetime. Danny closed his laptop, sat there in his kitchen, coffee going cold, thinking about Walter, about the choice he'd made at 72 when he could have turned them away, about what it cost him, the risk, the effort, the way he'd given the last 3 years of his life to protecting something the world said didn't exist, about the journal that sat in Danny's safe deposit box with instructions on when to read it and what to do with the information. He called his mother. "Did you see it?" he asked when she picked up. Sarah was 62 now, living in Portland, running a small bookstore, trying to pretend the last 20 years hadn't happened. "The video? Yeah, I saw it. It's real. I know it's real, Danny. Question is, what are we going to do about it?" That was the question, wasn't it? They'd kept Walter's secret for 2 decades, kept their own, never told anyone about those 10 days, about the wound, about the way an impossible thing had lain in Sarah's back bedroom, fighting for its life while they tried to keep it alive. But now the video was out there. Now people were talking about hunting parties, about proof, about finally settling the question once and for all. Now there were men with guns and cameras, and the kind of ambition that didn't care what got hurt in the pursuit of fame. We tell them, Danny said. We tell them what we know. What Walter wanted us to remember. Danny, that's people will think we're crazy. Maybe. Probably. He looked at his daughter's school photo on the fridge. 12 years old. Same age he'd been. But Walter didn't keep me safe, just so I could stay quiet when it mattered. He taught me that helping costs something, and sometimes you pay anyway. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Then, okay, tell me what you need. What he needed was time. What he needed was a way to tell the story that people would actually hear. What he needed was to honor Walter's memory by doing what the old man had done, choosing right even when it was hard. He started with the journal, scanned every page, Walter's shaky handwriting documenting everything. The knock at 3 a.m, the wound, the fever, the 10 days of keeping something alive that shouldn't have been possible to save. The philosophy underneath it all. Being human isn't about what you look like. It's about what you do when someone needs help. Then he wrote his own account. Everything he remembered from being 10 years old and lost in the woods. Meeting Uncle, the cave, Auntie, the berries, and the kindness. The hunters who'd tracked them. The way Uncle had hidden him, had taken a bullet to get him home safe. His mother wrote hers. The mountain lions, the creek, the moment of seeing something impossible save her life, the guilt of shooting at it, the choice to help when Danny brought Uncle to her door. 3 perspectives, 3 witnesses, 1 truth. Danny sent it to a journalist he trusted, Rachel Moore, someone who'd covered environmental stories, who understood nuance, who didn't sensationalize. She read it twice, called him back within an hour. This is real, she said, not a question. Every word. You know what'll happen if I publish this. You know the kind of attention. I know, Danny said. Publish it anyway, but make it clear, make it absolutely clear that these creatures saved lives, that they're not animals to be hunted, that we owe them protection, not extinction. The article dropped on a Tuesday morning. The man who saved Bigfoot, a ranger's account of compassion, mystery, and what it means to be human. It went viral within hours. The response was everything Danny expected, and worse. Skeptics tore it apart, called it fiction, demanded physical proof. Believers went the other way, wanted coordinates, wanted to organize search parties, wanted to find the creatures and study them. Scientists weighed in, cryptozoologists, hunters. Everyone had an opinion, but underneath the noise, something else happened. People started sharing their own stories. Encounters they'd kept quiet for years, for decades. Sightings in the Cascades, the Rockies, the Appalachians, sounds in the night, knocks on trees, gifts left at campsites, stacks of stones, arrangements of sticks, evidence of intelligence, of communication, of something watching, waiting, choosing to stay hidden. One email stood out, from a woman in Montana, 78 years old, who'd been a nurse in the 60s. She'd found one injured by a bear trap, had spent a week keeping it alive in her barn before it was strong enough to leave. I never told anyone, she wrote. Didn't think they'd believe me. But after reading your story, I wanted you to know you and Walter weren't alone. Some of us chose to help. Danny read that email 3 times, showed it to his mother. They sat there in her bookstore after hours, surrounded by words and stories, and cried for the first time since Walter's funeral. He knew, Sarah said. Somehow he knew there were others. That's why he wrote it down. Why he told us to share it eventually. He wanted us to know helping matters, Danny said. Even when you think you're the only one doing it. The controversy raged for weeks. Congressional hearings about cryptid protection laws. Debates about wildlife management versus cryptozoology. Scientists demanding evidence. Hunters demanding access. The whole country arguing about something most people didn't believe existed. But the Forest Service quietly updated their protocols. Rangers got new training about handling encounters with unidentified large primates. Hunting restrictions got tighter in areas with repeated sightings. Nothing official, nothing that admitted anything, just practical adjustments for practical problems. Danny got assigned to a special unit, protection and research. His job was to investigate reports, document evidence, and most importantly, keep people away from the areas where these creatures might live. Give them space, give them safety. Let them remain what they'd always been. Myth with enough truth to survive. His first assignment took him back to the area where he'd been lost as a kid. The cave was still there, deeper in the woods than he remembered, but there, empty now. No ferns, no sign of habitation. But on the wall, scratched into the stone, he found it. 3 marks, parallel lines, deep grooves that would have taken incredible strength to carve. Underneath them, 3 more, and 3 more below that. 9 marks total. 3 sets of 3. Danny stood there, staring at them, understanding, blooming, slow. Not just marks, not just scratches, a message, or a memorial, or maybe just evidence that something had been here, had lived here, had counted to 3 the way humans count. The way Walter had counted 3 knocks. He took pictures, documented it, then made a decision that would have cost him his job if anyone found out. He filed the report as inconclusive natural rock formation, and he never told anyone the exact coordinates. Some things deserve to stay hidden. Some truths are better served by protection than proof. That night, camping near the cave, Danny heard it. 3 knocks on a tree trunk, maybe 30 yards out. He sat up, heart pounding, and waited. The knocks came again, then silence. He walked to the edge of his campfire light, looked into the darkness. "I'm here," he said. "Don't be afraid." The forest was quiet, but not empty. Never empty. He could feel it, the presence, the awareness, the sense of being seen by something that chose to stay unseen. "Thank you," Danny said to the darkness, "for keeping me safe, for giving me back to my mom, for teaching Walter that his life still mattered." 3 knocks answered. Soft, deliberate. Then the sound of something large moving away through the undergrowth. Danny stood there until the fire died down to embers, until the stars overhead wheeled through their courses, and the night began its slow fade toward dawn. He thought about Walter, about the choice he'd made, about the 3 years he'd gotten afterward, about whether those years had been enough. They were enough, Danny decided. Not because of the length, but because of what Walter had done with them. He'd lived those last years knowing he'd chosen right, knowing he'd helped when helping mattered. That was worth more than decades of just existing. The sun came up cold and clear. Danny broke camp, hiked back to his truck, drove toward the ranger station. He had work to do, people to protect, creatures to keep safe, the balance to maintain between what people wanted to know and what they needed not to know. It was the job Walter had given him 20 years ago without either of them realizing it. Over the next decade, Danny built something quiet but effective. A network of rangers, researchers, local guides, people who'd had encounters, who'd chosen not to exploit them, who understood that some things were more important than proof. They shared information, coordinated protection efforts, quietly managed the areas where these creatures lived. They never called them Bigfoot. That name carried too much baggage, too many B-movies and hoaxes and tourist trap nonsense. Among themselves, they used Walter's term, the folk, simple, respectful, acknowledging that these were people in their own way, with their own language, their own culture, their own right to exist unmolested. Emma, Danny's daughter, joined the effort when she turned 18, studied wildlife biology at Oregon State, spent summers working with her father, learning the protocols, understanding the mission. She never got to meet Walter, but she knew his story, knew what he'd done, knew what it meant. He was just some old guy, she said once, reading through his journal for the dozenth time. Nothing special, and he changed everything. That's the point, Danny told her. He was ordinary. That's what made it matter. Proved that anyone can choose to help. Anyone can decide that compassion outweighs fear. Emma looked at her father, this man who'd spent his whole career protecting something most people thought was fake. You think there are more of them? More than just uncle and auntie? Has to be, Danny said. Otherwise, they'd have died out centuries ago. I think there are pockets, small populations, scattered through the forests, staying hidden because they learned a long time ago what happens when they don't. So what's the end game? We just protect them forever? Never tell anyone definitively that they're real? Danny thought about that, about truth versus survival, about what Walter would say if he were here. The end game is they get to keep existing. That's it. That's the whole mission. Whether people believe or don't believe, that's secondary. The only thing that matters is that when our great-great-grandchildren walk through these woods, the folk are still out there, still living, still knocking 3 times on trees to say hello. Emma nodded slowly. Yeah, okay, I can live with that. She became the best ranger Danny ever trained. Better than him, in some ways. She had his compassion, but also her grandmother's practical streak, Walter's philosophical bent. She understood that the work wasn't about proving anything. It was about maintaining the space where the impossible could remain possible. Years passed. Danny got older. The job got harder as logging interests pushed deeper, as climate change shifted habitats, as people with drones and thermal cameras got better at finding things that wanted to stay lost. But the network held. The protection continued. The folk survived. Danny was 63 when his mother died. Sarah passed in her sleep, peaceful, surrounded by books in the store she'd built. At her funeral, Danny told stories about the creek, the mountain lions, the choice she'd made to help when it would have been easier to call the police. She taught me that fear and compassion can exist together, Danny said, that you can be scared and still do the right thing. That's what Walter showed her, and that's what she showed me. They buried her in Portland, next to her second husband, a good man who'd loved her despite never quite understanding the shadows in her past. But Danny knew where she really belonged, where part of her had stayed since that October morning when his 10-year-old self had knocked on Walter's door. He drove to Walter's grave after the funeral, stood there between two headstones, two people who'd changed his life, who'd taught him what it meant to choose right when choosing wrong was easier. "Thank you," he said to them both, to the stones, to the memories, to the woods beyond, for everything, for keeping me safe, for teaching me that helping matters, for showing me that ordinary people can do extraordinary things. The wind moved through the Douglas firs. Somewhere in the distance, a branch cracked, the sound of something moving, or maybe just the forest being itself. Danny stood there until the sun set, until the stars came out, until 3 soft knocks echoed from somewhere in the trees. He smiled. "I know," he said. "I'm here too." Emma took over the protection program when Danny retired at 70. He was too old for the long hikes, the rough terrain, the physical demands of the work. But he consulted, advised, told stories to the new rangers about what mattered and why. His youngest grandchild, Marcus, was 10, the same age Danny had been when he'd gotten lost in those woods. Smart kid, curious, the kind who asked questions that didn't have easy answers. One evening, sitting on Danny's porch watching the sunset, Marcus asked the question Danny had been waiting for. "Grandpa, is it real? All those stories about Bigfoot and Uncle, and what happened to you?" Danny looked at his grandson, saw himself at that age scared, lost, reaching out his hand to something impossible because he didn't have another choice. Saw Walter too, somehow, the echo of the old man in this young face. The same determination, the same essential goodness. "What do you think?" Danny asked. Marcus was quiet for a moment. "I think it's real. I think you wouldn't spend your whole life protecting something that was fake. And I think they need us, to keep them safe, because nobody else will." Danny's throat went tight. "That's exactly right, buddy. Will you tell me? Tell me everything?" So Danny did. Told him the whole story, start to finish. The cave, the berries, the hunters, Walter's cabin, the wound, the fever, the 10 days of keeping something alive that shouldn't have been possible to save, the journal, the choice to finally speak up, the network they built, all of it. Marcus listened, eyes wide, not interrupting. When Danny finished, the sun had set completely and the stars were out and the woods were full of the sounds that woods make when they think nobody's listening. "Can I help?" Marcus asked. "When I'm older. Can I be part of it? If that's what you choose," Danny said. "But Marcus, it's not easy. It means keeping secrets. It means doing things that make people think you're crazy. It means putting someone else's survival ahead of your own desire for proof or recognition. It's a hard road." "Grandpa," Marcus said seriously, "if they're real, if they're out there, if they need help, how is that even a choice?" Danny looked at his grandson and saw the future of the work, saw the next generation of protectors, saw Walter's legacy continuing in a child who'd never met him but somehow understood what the old man had known, that being human isn't about what you look like. It's about what you do when someone needs help. "You're right," Danny said. "It's not a choice. It's a responsibility. And if you want it, it's yours." Marcus nodded, satisfied. Then, "Do you think I'll ever see one? Ever meet them like you did?" "Maybe," Danny said. "Or maybe you'll spend your whole life protecting something you only ever hear in the distance. Either way, you'll know you did the right thing. That has to be enough." It was enough for Walter. It had been enough for Danny. It would be enough for whoever came next. That night, after Marcus had gone home, Danny sat on his porch with cold coffee and thought about time, about how it moves, how it accumulates, how the choices you make echo forward in ways you can't predict, about how a 72-year-old carpenter with nothing to live for had made one decision at 3 in the morning and changed everything. 3 knocks, soft against the side of his house. Danny didn't even turn around, just smiled. "I know," he said, "still here, still keeping the promise." The knocks came again. 3 more. Then 3 more after that. Danny counted them. 9 total. 3 sets of 3. The same pattern he'd seen carved in the cave wall all those years ago. Not random, not instinct. Communication, memory, connection. "We remember too," Danny said to the darkness. "We remember what Walter did, what you did. We remember that helping matters. That compassion is stronger than fear. That ordinary people can protect extraordinary things." The night was quiet after that, but not empty. Never empty. Danny sat there until the cold drove him inside, until his knees complained and his back ached, and all the little indignities of aging made themselves known. He went to bed thinking about Walter, about Margaret, about all the people who'd come before and all the people who'd come after, about the chain of choosing right that stretched back into the past and forward into the future, about how one knock at 3 in the morning could change everything. He dreamed that night, not of being lost in the woods, not of being 10 and scared and far from home. He dreamed of walking through the forest with Walter beside him, both of them young and strong and full of purpose. They came to a clearing where Uncle stood waiting, and Auntie, and others, a whole family of the folk, a whole community surviving in the spaces between what people knew and what they believed. Walter looked at Danny and smiled. "We did good," he said. "We lived right. That counts for something." "It counts for everything," Danny said. Then he woke up. His house was quiet. Outside, the sun was rising. Another day, another chance to choose right. Danny got up, made coffee, looked out at the tree line. Somewhere out there, in the vast green cathedral of the Cascades, they were out there, living, surviving, knocking 3 times on trees to say hello, to say thank you, to say we remember. And here, in houses and ranger stations, and around campfires, people who knew kept the faith, kept the secret, kept the promise Walter had made at 72 when he could have closed the door but didn't. The protection would continue, the network would hold, the folk would survive. Not because of proof, not because of science, not because of anything official or documented or peer-reviewed, because of compassion, because of choice, because ordinary people decided that helping mattered more than understanding, that some things were more important than answers. That's what Walter taught them. That's what they'd carry forward. That's what would keep the folk safe for as long as there were people willing to choose right when choosing wrong was easier. Danny finished his coffee, got dressed, went to work. Same as he'd done for 40 years. Same as he'd do until he couldn't anymore. Same as Emma would after him, and Marcus after her, and all the others who'd come after that. The chain held, the promise kept. The knocks in the night, answered by people who understood what they meant. Wan kuracha, I'm here. Don't be afraid. That's what it always meant. That's what it would always mean. And that's what mattered when everything else fell away. Years from now, when Danny was gone, and Emma was old, and Marcus was carrying the work forward to another generation, someone would ask why. Why keep the secret? Why protect something without proof? Why dedicate entire lives to preserving something most people thought was myth? And whoever was left would tell them about Walter, about the knock at 3 in the morning, about the choice he made, about the way an ordinary man, with nothing to live for, found purpose in keeping something impossible alive, about how helping someone, anyone, anything, is never wasted, never meaningless, never just a footnote, about how the truest measure of being human is what you do when someone needs help, and helping them might cost you everything. That's the story. That's the truth, underneath the truth. That's what survives when the details fade, and the names are forgotten, and all that's left is the essential shape of what happened. Someone knocked. Someone answered. Someone chose compassion over fear, and the world was better for it. The rest, as Walter wrote in his journal, is just details. But God, what beautiful details they were.